Hi, and welcome to episode 31 of the ChessTDD series. I'm going to pick up from the sort of disaster that happened last time, and please forgive me if I'm a little rusty here. I actually recorded the code for this right after recording the last episode, which is now more than a week ago, so I'm kind of trying to remember exactly what happened. Let's see if we can't get that straightened out, but as best I can recall, after a lot of floundering, I finally started to pick up and understand what was going on, which was to understand how these tables actually work in terms of stuff getting passed into the methods. And specifically, the big bugaboo for me was that I was not getting it right that you needed column headers. So what I started out with here was, as you could see from me moving the appropriate Trello card over, was recognizing that there was a basic problem with the way I had copied and pasted this concept. And so I was spending some time looking at it and trying to figure out, okay, so what do I actually want to be variables passed into this then? And what do I want to fix in place? Because I realized I had gotten it to pass by just kind of grabbing the context from when and figuring it out in the method while ignoring the parameters. So what I really want to do here, and what I start getting towards, is the following moves should have an X and a Y coordinate, and then I should list out the moves available for the piece that I'm talking about. So one of the difficulties I had here is, again, another thing I could have asked somebody about. Maybe I should get Darren or somebody to consult on this for me, because I struggled a bit, as you can see here, with the syntax. So what I wanted to do is have something that was nice and readable in the actual description in the Gherkin text here. But I started getting into weird situations where representing these coordinates in traditional coordinate format, can I do that, or do I need some kind of delimiter or something when it comes to how I represent that? Hopefully that's clear. But basically, so or the comma and the parentheses, do those create like special characters in that string text of the attribute that's getting matched? So what I did was I saw that this created all kinds of problems for me. I started just experimenting, I guess, with, okay, so if I do this, what gets generated in the attribute? And so that's kind of where I was at. Messing with this took me some time in this episode, more than I would have liked to spend. But frankly, this is kind of how I learn. I could go read it in a manual, but in very bullheaded fashion, I usually try to do what I think ought to work. And then when I'm rewarded, great. And when I'm not rewarded, for me at least, the lesson is driven home more profoundly. Because I'm not just learning things without a purpose. I'm now learning based on what I failed at last time. So I am no expert in not only in Gherkin and the syntax and semantics, but especially in this particular implementation. So needless to say, I don't really remember if or what worked here. I got something working eventually, but we'll kind of figure that out together. Now that a week has passed, I didn't retain the information all that well. But in the next episode, I will have something to look at, so that will help. I can tell just based on looking at this that the thing I seem to be struggling with here is passing in multiple things. And what exactly, like, how do I represent integers? How do I match this pattern? Would help if I got the wildcard there, or whatever that is, in the right order. But sooner or later I get there. Again, this is sort of similar to last time. I'm hoping there's value for you watching this, in not only when I get things right, because I can certainly show you how to do test-driven development and outside-in test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, but this is a new tech for me. So I don't know. I'm hoping you get some value out of seeing what it looks like for me to interact with a new technology. maybe learning what not to do, but also maybe learning some techniques for how to, I guess, run experiments. So it's informative for me, I guess, as I'm modifying this this pairing of stuff here. The end crunch is nicely helpful for seeing whether or not I'm even getting into the method. Like, are we actually, see here it's black, so I'm not getting into that method, which tells me that I'm not even getting a match from the actual feature file to this attribute above the method. So there are little kind of tricks, I guess, I'm picking up for managing this and figuring things out. This is better than having to get that feedback by explicitly building or even running, or building and running the code. So yeah, spec flow binding exception, there's another. So I can see that as we go. So that's a plug for NCrunch. And something, frankly, to occupy space with as I watch myself struggle with this again. So that's an interesting piece of feedback. Without the parentheses, it seems to work. If I add the parentheses, then it breaks. So I don't remember. At this point, I might have decided to say, oh, nope, I had some escape characters in me to try. Apparently that didn't work. So I was trying to kind of strike a balance here between readability and actually getting it to look the way I wanted. And it appears as though, as is typical with me, I just banged my head against the wall until I finally got it exactly as I wanted. I don't naturally tend to gravitate towards compromise solutions. It's just maybe a personal strength or failing, depending how you look at it. The main thing I struggle with when it comes to software development is forcing myself to admit defeat and bring in help or what have you when it's appropriate, not spin my wheels. I tend to be stubborn. In this case, I guess it paid off after a fashion. It made my video a little bit longer, but I do have a pretty readable test to go from in the future. I really like that I got those parentheses in there. May seem small, but to me, it's not. I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking about how important I think readability and naming is, and the whole point here is to have things be readable. So I'd rather not skimp on it. I'd rather spend an extra 5 minutes if I need to, figuring out how to make this as readable as possible to someone that understands the problem domain of chess. Now, admittedly, I don't know if the coordinates or even how that's typically represented. I guess I should probably do a bit more research, but at least from somebody who knows math, that will be more familiar, pairing the coordinates into a tuple. Okay, so I am doing what I've learned here in the past. I'm reaching back in and getting the board from the context that we get from the when clause. And I'm actually now looking at, so I also decided here I was going to do some strategic renaming. In the last episode, I had kind of messed up and then panicked and wanted to get to a state where things were making sense. So I just kind of went with the A through whatever letter that was, F, G. Here I want to call these columns 1 through 8. So the rows themselves already get a coordinate number along with them. That much I figured out. So now I'm numbering the columns. And what this is getting me is at least 1 based indices instead of 0 based. I will fix the reversed order at a later time. And here I spent some time trying to get a little more uniformity out of it. You might argue that this wasn't necessarily worth doing, or at least doing on the video, but such as it is, this is the unfiltered stuff. So I've got a green test because the white king shouldn't have any moves. So that was done intentionally. It was relatively easy to get green on a scenario that was already correct like that and correct by having nothing. So the next thing I want to do, and now I'm getting back into territory that's familiar to me now that I've sort of shaken the trees and all the right syntax has fallen out and everything. I'm going to remove this pawn, and now I've got a red test. So when I remove the pawn, that's a sanity check for me. I should expect failure, and that tells me I wrote the last acceptance test right. And you'll notice I'm still following the same kind of logic and cadence with this acceptance test-driven development that I was with the unit test-driven development. Specifically, it stands to reason that we're going to fail if we remove that white pawn in front of the white king, because now the white king will have a move. And then I mentioned this earlier, but I want to start and end don't make sense in this context. I'm talking about X and Y coordinates. So what I expect to do to get this test to pass is to actually put in here the move that the king will have. And if I've implemented things right, then it should pass. But just getting, let's see. So I was getting the row count from the table being passed in there as the number of moves. So all I was asserting at first here was that that the number of moves I would get from the board were the same number of moves as the table passed in. So in the first test case, both of those should have been 0. Here I'm expecting 1 move for the white king. So what's the problem? Why am I not matching? Why is the table I'm passing in from the feature file not matching the actual number of moves coming back from the board get moves from method? And what we start to get at here is the first time you're really going to see maybe that this effort, this acceptance test stuff is potentially worth doing. So I'm experimenting a little bit here. I see that if, is a sanity check. So I wasn't necessarily believing yet that there was a problem in the underlying code. I mean, I haven't been knocking at the door enough, so to speak. So I was giving myself a sanity check here. Did I do something weird in the code? If I kind of walk back to a duplicate of the last scenario, does it go green? And the answer is yes. So the next thing I might do, and I can't remember the interceding week, but it might occur to me to actually go there and, add another move or something and see if I get this successfully. Oh, no, I moused over and I saw that instead of 1 move, I'm getting 7. That's how many moves are coming back from board.get moves from. That's interesting because you know what that feels like to me? 7 moves. Why would I have 7 moves? It's almost as if the king had all the moves coming back as if instead of just getting 1, you were getting them till the end of the board. It's essentially I'm getting moves as if the king were a rook instead of a king. So what I'm going to do here, and I don't know if this is something that people, whatever set of people use NCrunch along with SpecFlow might do this, but I'm going to stick a sort of more targeted assert here. It's an assert I'll delete here in a moment, but this is going to allow me to do a form of sanity check. I'm not as comfortable with getting this going in the debugger and all that, so I'm going to just test something out, and I'm going to say that, I want to just make sure for my own sanity, am I even getting back a king, or is this a rook? So it looks like, based on the fact that I'm still getting through to the second assert, that this is in fact a king coming back, so that was the first attempt to see if maybe one of my core underlying assumptions was wrong. So now what this seems to be saying is that if I set this situation up in the unit tests with a king, I should see the same behavior, that this is in fact a behavior of king. It's not that board or my setup or something is somehow giving me the wrong kind of piece. So what I'm doing here now is a technique that you'll start to see me do more and more here as we go forward. And this is the sort of interesting, intricate dance of ATDD or outside in TDD versus, I guess, traditional TDD, whatever you might want to call it, inside out. So I have used an acceptance test or an outside-in kind of test to root out what seems to be a bug. So I'm going to put a pin in my problem here, and I'm going to get more focused and see if I can find somewhere to write a unit test that exposes this problem. So I've exposed a problem in the whole system. Now I can sort of check my understanding of the code by trying to write another failing test that's more specific and more directed at the actual problem. And that's an interesting way of debugging. It's probably new to you if you're watching this series. And it's a way, I guess, of going about your normal debugging, except you're leaving kind of like a breadcrumb trail of unit tests that have proven of some kind of actual value. So it looks like here maybe I still didn't quite believe what was going on. I must have started to, or my head wouldn't have been in like, hey, let's go and check in and see what the unit test classes look like mode. But sorry for the spoiler. I do eventually wind up in the unit test. I think I was having trouble figuring out how exactly to go about debugging these spec flow tests. Yeah, a couple of fails there, I guess, somewhere in the spec flow context menu. Yeah, there we go, debug. So I did go in here and I guess sanity check in some form. Just I think probably I wanted to make sure maybe that I was getting into, that I was on the right track, that I was getting into the actual King's method. So this provides an interesting visualization. Oh, I remember what I was doing here. I was not yet convinced that there was a bug in my logic. So I think I was checking the board to make sure, hey, am I looking at the right king? Is there, I don't know, somehow a piece in the way that that I didn't think was there or something. I was not quick, even after all this elapsed time, to want to believe that I had been sitting on a bug in this code for, gosh, I guess months by now. But I stepped on through to see what was going wrong, and sure enough, it did wind up being in the king class. And it was actually a pretty stupid mistake. And this is the kind of mistake that can escape to production, even when you're following TDD. It's why it's important to have different kinds of tests as a sanity check. And you're going to see more and more of this as I go, that there is no substitute for exercising your application in, real production type scenarios. So I think what I was doing here, you're still watching me step through and say, okay, where are all these, I see that this, and this is where clean readable code helps a lot too. So now I'm not having trouble reading this. I am saying, okay, well, so I'm getting all possible moves and then I'm qualifying them. So I'm kind of sanity checking here to see, does all possible moves make sense if I look at this in the debugging context? If that makes sense, then, gee, I must be doing something wrong here in the filtering somewhere. But I can see that in all possible moves, there were still way more than I would think in there. So what is it that's going wrong? If I had a little better grasp, I might have just started out writing a test in this class, but I think at this point I've got it. And so you're going to see me here write a test quickly that I should expect to go red. So trying to think back now to what that test was, clearly I kind of stared at the screen here for a minute or two before figuring it out, but I got around to it. So probably, given what I'm seeing, that there's way too much, there's way too many moves in the get possible moves from method or whatever that was. Presumably, I can cover this error case by asserting the get moves from is not for a king, returning a square that's 2 squares ahead of the current square. So basically, I am picking out, and I mean, maybe you could have said the 1-7 away or whatever, but I'm going to say, look, if I have a king at this 3-3 spot, I want to make sure that I'm not getting back a possible move at 3-5, which would indicate that the king was moving like a rook. So if that's happening, it's a failing case. What you want to do, at least I found, when you're zeroing in on a broader a bug that's exposed in a broader context, you want to continue to be truthful to the same kind of thing reproducing the error. So I wouldn't want to get creative and do like a diagonal move or something. So I talked over it, but in case you didn't get it, as I was coding it, what happened there was I had used the board size there in the king method instead of hard coding in 1, which is the rule for king. Completely stupid, boneheaded error that you might expect. Should have caught it when I was TDDing out that method. Missed it somehow. Life goes on, though. I've caught it now. And an interesting thing you saw was that because, like I was saying, I kept the test case specific, when I solved the unit test, or the problem that the red unit test was exposing, it also solved the problem we stumbled into at that acceptance test. So what you've witnessed here right now is the actual unassailable value of writing these kind of acceptance tests. I just started writing tests that I assumed would pass, and it took me a while to realize it wasn't just me not knowing how to use SpecFlow. Like, look at that. In doing this, we exposed an actual defect that would have escaped a production and caused problems. But when we laid it out and said, here's a real world chess kind of scenario, we got a red test, zoomed in, figured out where it was broken at the unit level, fixed it, and then we got, a passing acceptance test up here now. So at this point, I can comfortably move on to the next scenario, and I'm going to say that if we, let's see, king with nothing around. So in this case, I just want to make assertions about the black king. And I feel like the black king ought to have 5 moves, so I go through and list them out here. So the black king at 3-8 is, as you're looking at the board here, moving 1 to the left. Then there's diagonal, then there's moving it forward 1, diagonal and to our right, and then finally directly to the right. So we're getting beyond just counting rows here, I think. And at some point, I'm going to want to write something that exposes the problem that we're just saying, like, oh, well, there should be 1 move for each row listed in this table. That's kind of But for now, I have to figure out, okay, why is it failing now? This time, I'm a little bit more on my guard. So is it something with this this implementation? Is it caused by the fact that I'm doing this obtuse thing where instead of checking for specific rows, I'm just checking that the count is the same? That doesn't make sense. There's a deeper kind of problem going on here. If I'm expecting that I'm going to get back 5 moves and I'm only getting 3, but this time, once bitten, twice shy. This time I'm assuming, hey, I don't think I did a great job, as it turns out, with the implementation of king here. So instead of doing a lot of debugging and all that, I'm just going to write a test as a hypothesis. And I'm going to say, like, look, let's recreate this exact situation in a unit test and see what happens. And the value of this is, as I mentioned before, the specifics are kind of leaving a trail of breadcrumbs in the form of unit tests. But the nice thing here on top of that is that I'm actually kind of sizing up my understanding and saying, okay, let's cut all the stuff out of here. I have this hypothesis. I don't trust this king get moves from method anymore. So I'm going to forget about the board and kind of any other moving parts in the acceptance tests. And I'm just going to recreate this with more focus, and I'll see whether I have a problem or not. This is exactly the same kind of thing that you do in a debugger, but you're doing it with tests. Now, it's an interesting thing there that went green. So it turns out, okay, the problem here doesn't actually anymore seem to be in that move, or in that get moves from method. That's doing the right thing. So when I recreate this at the unit level, things go okay. So now I've eliminated a potential source of problem, and I know to go look somewhere else. that's really kind of at the core of what debugging does, especially if you're doing it well. It's like it's like searching a sorted list. It's, you want to go in O of log n time. You cut the problem space in half and see which half it's in, cut the problem space in half again, and you get at it as quickly as possible that way, as opposed to like some kind of brute force one at a time search. So if I eliminate get moves from, something else must be going wrong here in one of these other methods. So I've still got all possible now is 5, which is right. So what's going on? I iterated through those manually in the debugger just to kind of sanity check here. And I don't remember if exactly at what point. So, okay. I am losing pieces here somewhere between all possible, which is right, and then the filtration. And I'm getting, this is a particularly long video, and my apologies. I started to feel acutely that it was running long, but I wanted to get back to green by hook or by crook here. And I'm sorry to say, I don't remember how I did it. I'd like to think I fought the good fight and solved this problem. I think maybe I backed the test out so that I could commit and move on. Because here we are 26 minutes in, which is already about 4 minutes past where I usually go. So, okay, all possible moves as 5, and then it looks like maybe there's some kind of problem I want to say with is blocked, or does friendly piece exist at. It seems as though I'm having a problem in one of those, and I don't remember whether I solved that problem quickly or not. I'm using the debugger here a little bit more than I usually like to. Not a huge fan of doing that. I'd much rather discover problems with writing of unit tests, but as long as I take whatever information I'm getting here from the debugger and then kind of translate it once I have a hypothesis into unit tests, I certainly don't like to live in the debugger. So here, I'm trying to figure out whether the problem is blocked. So kind of one at a time, I'm checking what's going on. And I really, for the life of me, can't remember that I straightened this problem out. So I feel like I probably just punted and resolved to figure this out next time via Trello. But, maybe not. I see there's about 2 minutes left in the video. It's kind of interesting doing this. It's almost like taking some kind of amnesia pill or something and watching somebody else code. Yes, so I think what I did here was quickly go off and Google how to comment out a scenario in SpecFlow and then actually comment it out. I've seen people do an interesting technique, which is to leave themselves a failing test that's failing in a very targeted way, like, assert.fail, you were here last time or something, as a way to mark progress. To me, I'm getting ready to commit this code on up to the master. I don't ever commit code with failing tests. That's bad voodoo. And I think, at least I prefer it when in fact you don't even allow that to be a thing. A while back, I can remember having a continuous integration set up with actually a gatekeeper check-in. So when you try to check in code, it would create a shelve set in TFS, and it would run, or it would compile it, it would run the unit tests, the static analysis, the whole 9 yards. And if anything didn't look good, it would actually punt the check-in back. So there are scenarios you can create that are, you may argue whether they're desirable or not, but they're pretty slick and sophisticated, where you literally could not commit a failing test scenario. And then I remember feeling sort of desperate towards the end of this video because, man, I commented this test out and it was still failing somehow, but then I had just deleted it and everything passed. So I think I just called it here. Mission was accomplished. sorta then was configured better. It still needs to check for the actual moves instead of just counting that the number of rows is equal, but got more immediate problems to straighten out here with yet another bug in the actual code. So I went ahead and committed, and yeah, this is the end that is coming back to me now as I watched it. I just said, okay, well, we'll get to this next time. It is certainly a journey, and I'm floundering more than I'd like, but my hope is that next time around, we'll get that bug straightened and then get back to writing more acceptance tests. So I will see you next time.